That's perfect. This way you guys can be tall. I'll be down here. Yeah, you're kind of, well, you know, taller with a little assistance. Talk about getting tall. Anybody ever seen one of these before? Your mom has one? Does your mom have the one with the magic button where when you push it, it goes, that's bad luck? Open it, who told you that? Okay, well, after a bit. Well, this is a special place. This is a special umbrella. No, this is a regular umbrella. We haven't been getting much use out of umbrellas lately, have we? Because we haven't had much rain, have we? But we're hoping for rain. And when the rain comes, we will need the umbrella to keep us dry. That's what an umbrella is for, right? Calvin kinds of likes rain, yeah. You're Calvin and you like rain. Okay, then you can stand over there and we'll stay dry over here. You can get wet in the rain. No. Have you ever looked at how these things actually work? Because it is kind of a cool magic trick. You know, it's all small, comes together like that. And then when you push the button or lift the ring, it comes up and here's all these little tiny skinny pieces of metal, kind of like the bow on a violin bow. You know, it's a thin little thing that's not strong on its own at all. It looks like a pterodactyl wing, kind of the same function. If you were trying to stay dry under just one of these little metal things, would you be dry or wet? You could have like one spot here where 8 raindrops didn't hit you and the other 300 do. Or you could bunch these all together and you might get like maybe this much of you is dry and the rest of it would be wet. But instead, the way this works is they all spread out and they hold this fabric so you're out of the rain. You're even out of the sun if you don't want to be in the sun. The umbrella works the same way, yeah? Supervisors at school use umbrellas to stay out of the sun because they're outdoors all day. Exactly. So what I'm going to suggest to you is everybody needs an umbrella sooner or later. Everybody gets rain. So sooner or later the storm comes and the rain comes and you need an umbrella for protection from the rain and the storm. And I'm going to suggest that this is an umbrella. This whole room, this whole church is your umbrella. Every one of them is like one of these bows. We come together on Sundays and we're all together like this. And then when we spread out to do our job, we provide some protection for folks when things are rough. One by one, not really that strong, but all together and connected by God and faith, we're protected from the tough times that come. Helps us stay kind of dry or stay kind of cool if the sun is too hot when it all comes together. That's your church umbrella. Let's hope that we have some rain in the next few days or next little while. So the rain that's useful for the crops is good, but we'll stay dry. Now we're going to sing. That's your cue. 143 Eagle's Wings if you need to watch the words. We're going to sing you off to Sunday school, where I don't think you'll have anything to do with umbrellas today. But I hope you're not. You could sing it. You could sing in the rain. Do you know that one? We're going to do that one. We're going to sing with Mark's cueing us up here. Here we go.
On behalf of the United Methodist Women, we give a special recognition award to someone who has given a lot to our church and to our community. we give the recognition to him, to this person, and we also send forward to our district a monetary donation which can further our global missions to women, children, and men of the world. So today, we're going to honor Steve Young, if he would come.
Well,
there he is.
Where did he go? Where did he go?
Come on down, Steve.
Come on down.
Come on over there.
Come join us. I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about this gentleman. Steve was born in Ripley, Ohio. Basic education in Ohio and Ohio State University. Entered the Navy and finished Iowa State and finished in Northridge, California. Stationed at Magoo here, met his wife at a church function. Steve's head usher, which means he is responsible for being sure that there are ushers there for each service and that they know their duties. This includes keeping lists up to date and listening to their needs and the needs of the people who the ushers are, so that they can make their jobs as seamless as possible. He also includes working to find new people to usher when there are openings. He frequently stays to assist ushers when they are either new or feel as if they need help. Also, he is called on to fill in for ushers who are not able to be at church on their assigned Sunday. Checks to be sure that the headphones are available and stored correctly at the end of services, as well as going through the pews, arranging the books, and removing items that have been left over by attendees. Make sure that the coffee carts are ready and in place. Ushers frequently for funerals, which involve not only the service, but setting up the flowers and pictures and etc., and taking items to the reception area. Help set up and take down for events at the church. That would include setting up the risers in the sanctuary for special events and taking them down. Setting up tables and chairs in the reception area, as well as taking them down. Takes out the trash for the special events. Helps set up, that's important. Yeah, gotta do that. Helps set up and take down the Christmas tree in the sanctuary each year. He assists with the Methodist Men's fundraiser. Note, he also even served the cake at the anniversary party for Frank and Pat Roth when the caterers fell through. He was there for their 50th, steps in. Steve does and will pretty much do whatever he is asked to do, and he does this with kindness and grace. He works not for applause or attention, but because this is the way of being the kind of person that he is. And we thank Steve for his work.
You're here.
Please join in the call to worship. O God, O sacred beginning, O Christ, O sacred companion, O Spirit, thou Holy One, heal and forgive us.
Transform us by your grace and teach us your ways. Guide us this day until we are fully one with you. Amen.
The first reading today is from Paul's letter to the early Christians gathered in the city of Corinth. The congregation reflected the city in being highly stratified, a few very wealthy people, but most of them poor, many Gentiles, some Jews, and diversity in their married status. These were all causes for divisions and arguments in the church about who was more holy, and so Paul writes in the 7th chapter, Hear what I say, brothers and sisters. The time is short and growing shorter. For the time remaining, even if you are married, live with the mindset of those who are single. Those who weep should live as those who have no tears. Those who party should live as those who have no pleasure. Those who buy things should live as those who have nothing. If you make use of this rebellious and broken world, now live instead as if you have no use for it, because the form of this world is on its way out. May we discover the meaning of these ancient words in our own time. Amen.
Just to consider briefly this strange thing that we do called corporate prayer. This is about the only place I can think of where we put a bunch of people together in one room and invite you to be silent together. It's not common, and especially for folks who might be visiting or trying this out for the first time, it can seem strange. And if we really consider it, it is an unusual thing. But we might also consider it like other instances where we come together collectively to listen, to receive, to participate, like a concert or a ball game, a place where we come together and in anticipation open ourselves and listen for an experience of something greater than just ourselves alone. Especially like a concert, perhaps an orchestra concert. If you've attended one of those, you know that the beginning is the room comes to silence and the oboe sounds the A and the orchestra comes into tune around that, and we know now we are about to hear something. So I invite us to be in a concert of prayer, to begin in stillness and listen and hear what it is that God may be saying to us, to set aside our words and hear what is the melody that God would have us hear. Gracious God, we open our hearts and minds to you. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the word you have placed in our hearts, for the melody you have placed in our hearts and minds. Thank you also for receiving our cares and our concerns, our hopes and expectations. hear also the prayer which we have learned to offer to you, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
The scene described in this lesson is at the very beginning of Jesus' public ministry. In keeping with Mark's sense of urgency, he shows us Jesus immediately starting to build his team. From chapter 1, we read, "After John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee announcing God's good news, saying, 'Now is the time. Here comes God's kingdom. Change your hearts and lives and believe this good news.' As Jesus passed alongside the Galilee Sea, he saw two brothers, Simon and Andrew, who were casting their fishing nets into the shallow waters. 'Come with me. I'll make a new kind of fisherman out of you. I'll show you how to catch men and women instead of perch and bass.' Right away, they left their nets and followed him. After going a little further, he saw James and John, Zebedee's sons, in their boat repairing their fishing nets. Straight away, he called to them with the same words, 'Come, follow me.' They too dropped what they were doing and left their father Zebedee and the boat with the hired workers." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Amen. So I coughed up the money to be culturally relevant, always trying to be culturally relevant. Went and saw the new Star Wars movies, The Last Jedi. How many people have seen that? Some, yes. I'm not a big Star Wars fan, more of a Star Trek guy, but as I suggested, the movie industry is a popular industry. A lot of people go to movies, they tell stories, and perhaps no film tradition carries more weight than Star Wars in the sense of people look to it, and so those who are writing for it are trying to write in response to what people's expectations and needs are to shape a story that's meaningful and engaging, and so this one is pretty good. It's pretty good. For those of you who are out of date and want to catch up, where we are right now is, of course, the unending saga of the battle of light and darkness between the Empire and the rebels. And now it's young Rey, a young woman who is kind of leading the rebels in the resistance, but it's dark days, troublesome times. They're behind. They're down on the score, if you will. And so she goes to find Luke Skywalker, the original young introductory Jedi, to try and recruit him, and it's a very poignant scene. Really, everything pivots around this. She's appealing to him, we need you, and it's as much as anything, we need the hope that you signify, the hope that you can bring. And he doesn't necessarily agree to go, but it makes a strong case for the role of a leader, one who we would follow. So that was a nice movie, a nice fantasy. The current news is, however, very much in sync with that. Oprah Winfrey gave a very intoxicating, inspiring speech at the Golden Globe Awards. How many people have heard or saw any of that? It was very good, and it caused a lot of speculation about, hey, we've got one TV star in the presidential office. What if we had this one? How would that be different? And that has run through the news for the last little bit with various reactions to that. A real and genuine desire for someone to lead us with hope. Jesus comes and says, "Come and follow me." He invites us to follow his leadership. That's the story today. So I invite you to pray with me as we consider, what kind of a leader was Jesus, and where would he lead us? Let's pray. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and meditations of these our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O thou who art rock and redeemer. Amen. This is, as Evelyn read it at the start of Mark. Mark is very cut and dried, very practical, very to the point. He's urgent. Here's Jesus at the beginning, and he's collecting people who are willing to follow him, and he's very blunt. Come, follow me. Doesn't say where, doesn't say how or what. He just presents himself. And obviously he had some charisma, because people indeed, as the story tells here, dropped what they were doing and would follow him. Come and follow me. A leader is defined by the fact that they have leaders. But then we have to start asking some questions to go with that. Questions that it doesn't tell us in this story that the disciples asked, but we might ask. Come follow me from what to what? Where are we going? If I follow you, where are you leading us? Well, that's really the overarching theme for this whole sermon. Where would Jesus lead us? Where would we follow if we follow Jesus? But to get inside of that and take it apart a little bit, just to establish, to follow means that we have to talk about leadership. What's the nature of leadership? What kind of leadership are we looking for? What are our expectations about leadership? So I want to tell you about a particular guy. If you go to Walteria United Methodist Church, which is down kind of in the Long Beach area, old, small, neat little congregation. And if I went there and described Don Howell, if I talked about CUMC and Don Howell and everything that Don does here, the people at that church would say, "Oh, you mean Herb Mercer." See, every lucky congregation has a Don Howell or a Herb Mercer. And Herb's the guy at Walteria. Herb's, he's kind of built like a barrel, ridiculously handsome. Built like a barrel, which is appropriate since he worked in the petroleum industry for years and years, worked for Standard Oil. And when he retired, he signed up to go on one of our bike trips. And very early on, we darn near killed him. The first day was like 95 degrees heat, and boy, he had a tough time of it. He stuck with it. He had the goofiest riding style. He rode like a crab. His knees shot out like this when he rode, and I was always worried. And indeed, he can't, now in his 80s, he can't ride anymore because his knees won't work. But boy, he could ride back then. So even though we darn near killed him on that first trip, he kept coming back. In fact, the next trip, he volunteered his truck. And we strapped all these bikes on the top of the truck, on the top of the camper shell, on the top of the driver's cab, and we were driving up to Mount Lassen. We were going to ride from Mount Lassen over to San Francisco. And as some of you know, the 395 gets kind of gusty up there. And so we were driving up the 395, and the sign said, "Beware gusty winds." And some of our group was sitting in the back of the truck, and I think even I was driving, maybe. And all of a sudden, they were pounding on the pass-through glass between the cab and the camper shell. He said, "Stop, stop. The bikes have blown off the truck." So this rack, which we had maybe kind of overloaded with, I think there was at least 6 bikes on the front rack, had detached from the cab of the truck and simply pinwheeled off the back. And there was sure enough, an 18-wheeler coming straight for it. He managed to dodge it. We stopped, got out in this just wailing wind, and the bikes were kind of messed up, the wheels were kind of messed up, and we came to this point where everybody stood around and looking to me and said, basically, "What are we going to do?" And I'd never been in that position before. And I didn't know what else to do other than say, well, we're going to go forward. Strap the bikes back on, get into the next town, try and find a bike shop, see what we can fix and see what we can get done. And we ended up managing to ride the rest of that ride. And at the end of that ride, which had some other bad moments in it that Karen can tell you about regarding food poisoning, nonetheless, we had a glorious trip with these difficult parts. And at the end, Herb, who we tried to kill on the first one, messed up his truck in this second one. We were putting some ice chests away or something like that. And Herb, who I'd come to respect because he's like Don. You know, he's a doer. He's got a great attitude. He helped hold the group together, tough rider. He was on the other end of the ice chest, and he says, "Well, Chief," he says, "Well, Chief, where are we going next year?" And again, I was kind of caught short, because what I realized after the fact was, number one, I was feeling a little odd that this older man whom I respected was calling me chief and treating me like I was in charge. And well, technically I was in charge, but what I thought I was doing was simply arranging things and putting things together so that other people could have the same kind of wonderful experience on a bike that I'd had. It was my way to share that experience. I understood myself as a manager to put things together so things would work right. But Herb was calling me out as a leader and saying, "Where are you going? We'll follow you wherever you go." That was a responsibility I wasn't ready for, that I didn't recognize, I didn't understand at that time. But over time, and the more I frankly, as I worked with bishops who are leaders in our church and began to try and understand what is the role of a leader, one whom we would follow, I got a better and better understanding of that distinction between leadership and management. So leadership is always asking, what's the right thing to do? And why are we doing this? That's essential to the role of a leader. That was the spot I found myself in at that point with the bikes flipping off the truck. I had to say, what's the right thing to do? Which way are we going to go? And to be able to back that up with why we're doing it. Versus management asks, what's the right way to do it? How are we going to get this done? Put together the details, the practical pieces. Management doesn't question where we're going or why we're going. It's responsible for delivering. Now, both of those are necessary for any group to go forward. Both of those are a part of our moving forward on a journey. But it's important to know the difference between that leadership and management as we get into this a little farther. Leadership, in a bigger sense, is seeking to identify and name in a way that inspires and captures us what's the future we're going towards. If we're going to follow, where are we going? What's the preferred version of our future reality compared to the current reality, where management's role is essentially to maintain that existing system, to keep things going as they're going, to have them run smoothly, have it happen on time. That's the function of management. That's not leadership. Leadership is different. Management takes care of our current reality. Leadership asks the question, what's the future reality that we are to be called to? We get a glimpse of that in this story where Jesus invites the people to come and follow him when he says, okay, you're fishing, you're doing what you do to take care of yourselves, but now I'm going to invite you into something more. So we're starting to build a little grid here. For Andrew and Philip and the others, they were fishing to eat. They were fishing to take care of themselves. They might sell some along the way if they had enough, but basically they were taking care of themselves. Now Jesus calls them, invites them, describes a different future, a different way of being, to now fish for people, to be a part of introducing them, even as he is calling them into a greater awareness, a bigger picture of a spiritual reality beyond just their existing fishing reality, if you will. So the difference between the leadership and the management is here in this way we're going to start separating it out, is fishing to eat versus fishing to feed. And you all have done that. Remember last spring? Where we were all over in Brooks Hall along with our fellow United Methodist congregations, and we were packing up food to not just feed ourselves, but feed many. We worked hard for a couple of hours and packed up, I forget how many meals it was. It was in the thousands of bulk foods so that other people can eat. That's Jesus' call into more than just taking care of ourselves, but seeing our role together as taking care of others, of being a part of feeding others. That gets me into my next distinction here, my weather and our climate. And with those two, I'll break it out here in just a minute, but with those two, we end up with this little grid to keep track of all the pieces that go into understanding what Jesus means when he says, come and follow me. So to pick up where the kids were, I don't know about you, but I usually turn on the 10 o'clock news, both to see what the top of the news is and to check out the weather. I know you can do it online. I just like watching them do their little spiel and see how what kind of maps they have. This is in the My Umbrella category. So we're used to seeing stuff like this and where the weather is coming and going, what we can anticipate, why it's cold now, why it's freezing in New Jersey, and they're getting pounded with snow. That's usually all we have to care about, right? I mean, I get up in the morning like you, and I dress for the weather, at least in part, the weather that day. We're lucky in this in this area. It doesn't vary too much. It's warmer, it's cooler, but It's not like other places where it goes from great extremes. We're familiar with dealing with our weather, preparing for that. But we're learning more and more that our weather is defined by something much, much larger. And I really want to have to say the children's sermon today, yeah, that's true. It's a good metaphor, but that's a children's lesson. That's a children's lesson. We have to make use of our adult, mature, God-gifted brains to be able to understand and see there's more than just our weather and my little umbrella. We know, if we've got all the channels turned in, that we are in the midst of a fundamental shift in climate for the whole of the planet. It's more than just our weather. We are in the midst of significant climate change. And to recognize that brings us to that broader issue of what is the climate in which we live and serve. When Jesus says, come and follow, what's the climate in which we function? And by that climate, I mean that environment that is systemic and bigger than just what's happening to me. So the best example of that right now is, get up to my right slide here, some examples of climate change that we're in the midst of right now, from a climate that has been to a climate of patriarchy to Me Too. Women's marches across the country yesterday, and the whole Me Too movement, which has been surging through our news, is an indication of a change in what has been the traditional patriarchal climate, a climate that goes and is well-rooted all the way back to the time of Jesus and before him, particularly in the Middle East, a predominantly, overwhelmingly dominantly, patriarchal culture. I saw a really good quote the other day that said, you know, calling out Harvey Weinstein and having him stripped of all of his awards and cut to the side, that deals with a patriarch, but the issue is bigger than one guy. It's the patriarchy. It's a system of gender inequality that is now being called out into the open, where finally we can really deal with it collectively. We have a similar and parallel shift in climate for us within the church. We've talked about this before. The shift from religion, as most of us grew up with it and practiced it in places like this in the forms of worship, to a kind of spirituality that for many people, the majority in fact, especially those younger, who claim for themselves that they are spiritual but not religious, right? SBNR, spiritual but not religious. A setting aside, a stepping beyond, a leaving behind that older reality of religion as we know it into a kind of spirituality and missional service that we kind of recognize, but for especially younger generations, is a driving force in how they think about themselves in relationship to the divine and in relationship to one another and the world. A shift in climate, a shift in the climate of religion. There's other climates, of course, that we could name. I'm going to just do a couple of them real quick, the from and the to. From tribalism to citizenship. One of the things that we are in the midst of is tremendous partisanship, not within just our country. We see it in other, particularly Western countries, Britain, France, Germany, Hungary, the Eastern states, all of them in the grips of this extremism, of absolutism, of pushing to the sides with very little left in the middle and great acrimony in between. The need for us to shift from that climate of tribalism to citizenship, to understanding that we are all, as we live here and are participants in this country or any other country, we are citizens of something more than our racial, ethnic, gender identity, and in truth, a citizenship that is global, beyond the national borders and flags that we might wave. To get to that will mean a shift from the attitude and the climate of hostility that predominates right now to an attitude of hospitality that I'm convinced, and is expressed in our own welcoming statement, the church can give voice to in a unique way. A unique way. The church's voice in this climate of hostility to express a hospitality rooted in God's grace. Tougher ones, the climate of subjective to objective, and by that, well, I'll just say it, the shift from feelings to facts. We have become so absorbed in our polarization to how do I feel How does it make me feel? Does it make me feel good? Does it tee me off? We've become so absorbed in what we feel, what it's like under our little umbrella, that we've lost touch with the role of facts in understanding our world. I mean, for crying out loud, God gave us brains. It's in our Methodist marketing motto, open hearts, open minds. We have brains God has given to us to use. It's important that we use them and bring them to bear on all aspects of who we are, what it means to follow Christ, what it means to live in this world. That's got to be a part of the equation, or we're sucked back into the hostility and the tribalism. From and to, the selective to the inclusive. We're in the midst of a great debate about, in a variety of ways. Immigration is the easiest one, about our trying to pick and choose, about who do we say who is in versus who is out. And the gospel calls us to an inclusivity that recognizes the imago Dei, the image of God born in every person, in every place. From selective to inclusive, from hypocrisy to integrity, from saying one thing and doing another, to having our walk match our talk. Integrity of living what we say is important. All of these things are spinning around, trying to hold on to this distinction between leadership management and what I'm calling my weather versus our climate. And our call as Christians, our call within the church, we are called to engage all of those climate changes, if you will, in which we exist today. Because at the bottom line, fundamentally, what Paul was saying in Corinthians is pointing us towards living in an alternate way, right? What did that lesson say? Did you hear it? He says, if you're married, live as if you were single. If you're a partier, live as if you are not. If you are one who is mourning, live as one who does not have tears. He's essentially saying we're called to be something different, to be change agents, to help make the shift for all of us from the status quo to the kingdom of God. That means that when Jesus says, "Come follow me," he is staking his claim as a leader, and we are called to be followers of him. Remember, we're already followers, not necessarily of Jesus or the Spirit of Christ. We're already following in all kinds of ways different idols, different gods, different values, we're functioning within climates, and the question is, are we simply managing those? Are we sustaining the status quo? Or if we're going to follow Jesus, who challenges that status quo by lifting up the kingdom of God, are we ready to take our role as leaders in the environments in which we live? Jesus is not a manager. Jesus does not simply take care of and keep things the way they are. That's not Jesus' role. And neither is the church, because we are the embodiment of Jesus in our time. We are not managers. Our call, when Jesus says, "Come and follow," is to become leaders towards that kingdom, to have a vision of how things may genuinely be different, to bring integrity into the face of hypocrisy, to bring inclusivity into the face of exclusivity, to bring facts to bear relative to our emotions so that in balance we find a healthy way forward. All of those have to be a part of what it means to follow the one who says, "Come and follow me." Yesterday, Karen reported that she was down at the LA Women's March. A lot of people were taking pictures and selfies of each other, doing all kinds of stuff. And the one that really stuck out, and the daughter in this duo was a little weary from it. Was it on your bus, Del? The 98-year-old gal? Yeah. So this was, Nancy can tell this story as well. 98-year-old woman with her wheelchair, got her unloaded from the bus, sat down in her wheelchair with her flag wrapped around her and a sign. A lot of people had signs. A sign that said, "I'm 98 years old. I don't have time for this." 98 years old, and she's still kicking. Her daughter, who was responsible for moving her around, complained just a little bit how weary she was. Everybody wanted their picture taken with that woman, right? Of course you would. Because we're inspired when we see people living out the integrity of their convictions, their vision of a future that can be different compared to the way the current reality is. Of course we want that picture with them. But we're to live it. We're to do it as well. Not just her, not just some. All within the body of Christ are called to follow Christ, to be leaders in the face of the climate of all those things that must be changed if the kingdom of God is to come. So when Jesus comes and says, "Come and follow me," our answer is, where are we going next, Chief? Lead on. Amen.